Welcome. This is Dr. Ali Mugebel, and this is part of our Research Skills series. Today, we're covering writing skills, writing literature reviews specifically. So let's see how and what's involved in literature reviews. The outline of the presentation goes like this. We will start with the literature review. What does it mean? And then why are we doing it? What is the motivation behind doing literature review? Then we'll go into some features of effective literature review. And then we'll go into the main steps for writing the review. That includes planning, research, reading and research, analysis, drafting, and finally revising. As part of the way we write, we'll look at summarizing, synthesis, critique, and then comparison. These are different things you have to do when you write literature review. We'll conclude the presentation with a summary of the main ideas. So let's get started. Before answering the question of why are we doing literature review, we start by saying, what is literature review? We can define literature review as a critical look at the existing research that is significant to the work that are going to carry. So maybe we can think of the keywords here as being critical. We look critically at what exists, what was done before that. And we look at the work, the significant work, because there might be a huge amount of work, significant relative to the work that we are going to do. By the way, there are two schools. Some people would like to think first, not to get biased, and then find out what others did. Some people would say that think first and find what you thought about in the library. And some have, which is the classical way of thinking, first read what others did and then build on what they did. So two different schools of thinking. But just to restate this again, literature review is a critical look. It's not just any look, it should be critical with thinking at the existing research that's significant to the work being carried. Now, why are we doing literature review? What's the advantage? What's the motivation? Why would be interested? So that we can do it correctly. First, we need to provide some background information. If you start a new topic, you need to read what was done before, so you build the background of knowledge or the knowledge. Then you go to establish the importance. Okay, stating that many people are working on this field or some people are recently working on this field will establish the importance of the topic. That's to say that it's not just me, others are also interested. The third thing is to demonstrate that you are familiar. When I read your work and I find out that you stated this, this, and that, I will think that this guy really knows what is being done and what he's writing about. The fourth item is to find a gap for further research. And this is really the link. This should come at the end of the literature review. Once we write and state what was done critically, we should be able to define the gap and state that, okay, to the best of our knowledge, this work was not done before. Or to the best of our knowledge, nobody did this and that. So we can establish a gap. These 4 points are very important and they should be there in every literature review. Now, features of effective literature review. First, it should outline important research trends. You should not miss any new important trend. Second, it should assess the strengths and weaknesses of existing research, not just say that this guy did that. We should give some assessment. Third, identify potential gaps in knowledge. Fourth, establish a need for current and or future research projects. So based on what we read, we can find a gap, and then based on this gap, suggest future projects and ideas for research. Okay, now what are the main steps for writing a literature review? We have 5 steps. First, planning, reading and research, then analyzing, drafting, revising. We'll spend some time with each one of these. I will be using this figure again and again just to show you that we are going from one step to another. We'll start with planning, then reading, and then analysis, and so on. So let's get started here. So we just mentioned that literature review go through 5 stages. The first one is planning, as you can see here. So planning is about what type of literature review am I writing. I have to plan what type of literature review am I going to write. So we need to focus. We'll discuss the type, the scope, and then we need to define what is the discipline that we are covering. So when it comes to the focus, we need to ask the following question. What is the specific thesis or problem or research questions we're covering? Once we get focused, we know what are the references that we need to include and what are the references that we can eliminate that are irrelevant. So we can sort them, we can categorize them based on understanding what is the specific problem we are covering. Am I looking at the quantity? Am I looking at the disease description or treatment? Or so being focused will help eliminate or focus on the references. Then we look at the type. What kind of literature review are doing? Are we considering the theory, or are we focusing on the methodology for doing things? Are we looking at the policy? Are we interested in qualitative or quantitative analysis? Focus, type. Then we look at the scope. What is the scope of this work? And that will define what type of sources are we considering. Are we, for example, interested in just covering the problem or the solution within Saudi Arabia or within Europe or the United States? So we define our scope, and then that will help us find the references if we're going to use government resources, standards, journals, or conference papers. Then we also need to define what are the disciplines that are involved. For example, if you are doing sensing, is it biomedical sensing? Are you looking at medicine side or engineering part of it? Are we looking at the electrical components, devices? So we need to define what are the disciplines involved in the research. And usually there are more than one reference or field. Answering these questions is part of planning. If you know what's your focus, what's the scope and type, that will help you continue your research review or literature review. Now, it's time to reflect. So ask yourself regarding your specific problem, and please answer in the comment section. What are the focusing words for my specific research? For you specifically. What are the focusing words? What are the keywords that if you mention, it will help you know exactly what you are doing? Are you looking at the treatment? Are you looking at the construction, the experimental, theoretical? And then look at what fields are you working in? Is it informatics, machine learning, material, electrical, mechanical? Define the fields that are within your scope, and that will help you to know and sort out the references. Find the irrelevant and the relevant references. The second stage after planning, we need to look at here reading and research. And this stage, it will help us define. We have made the plan, and it's time to define what materials am I going to use. So we need to collect and read the material and summarize the sources. At this stage, we get the references, we summarize them, we read them. And we have the following points that we have to consider. What is the principal point, thesis, or question? And then, who is the intended audience? Am I writing for experts, for specialized persons, for people with engineering background, scientists? How does this study relate to others? Who is the authors? I need to know who are the authors. Are they popular? Are they well known or not? What does this study add to our project? What is the author's main purpose? If I read a reference, I need to know what's the main purpose of that reference. Is he teaching or preaching? Is he finding a solution or describing the problem? How is the author's position supported? if somebody come up with a solution, is he well supported? Does he have an evidence or not? And then what is the perspective of that reference, and what's the methodology being used? So based on these questions, we can select only relevant books and articles. Now, analyzing, the third stage in the literature review, after we have planned and we collected sources and we just kind of read them, we will need to do the analysis here. And the analysis, it's basically answer the questions, how do I assess existing research? This is the most important part, and most of the references, most of the literature I've seen fails in this part, because basically I call it one paragraph per reference. They will tell you reference 1 did this, then another paragraph, reference 2 did this. That's really not a good literature review. That's the minimum part. We can do much better. So a literature review is never just a list of studies. It always offers an argument about the body of research. So it's not just a list. There should be some argument. Now, this argument or analysis should be at the individual source level. So you take one reference, you make up your mind about that reference, but also it should be on the body of research. So you should give your input about the overall picture. How many references are there, and are they connected? Are they doing the same, or they're doing different things? So to go to that level, there are 4 tasks that are involved. Summarizing, the first level. Then synthesis, coming up with your own view. And then criticizing what exists. Critique. And you make the comparison. So unless these 4 are there, then most of the literature review that are not good, basically they stopped at the summary level. So they stop here and they never continue. And if you are doing this, then most likely this work is going to be shallow. Summary and synthesis. In your own words, summarize and or synthesize the key findings relevant to your study. It should be relevant, because if you give details that are, for example, about the experimental setup and so on, and this is irrelevant to your work, then it says that you are not really focused. What do we know about the immediate area? You need to mention through the reviews, through the references, what is known about the exact problem being covered. What are the key arguments, key characteristics, or key concepts, or even key figures in those references? What are the existing debate theories? Very important. What is their basic idea? Are they with or against, or what is the theory being there? What common methodologies are used? Experimental, simulation. So you should share with the reader what are the different methodologies being covered. Sample language for summary and synthesis. Here are some few words. You can say, for example, the author named Mugebel. Mugebel has demonstrated an example. Or we can say early work by Shannon, Samir, and Graves was concerned with. And then also we can say that Sayyid and Ghassan compared. So I'm giving you these underlined words just to give you an example of how you state what others did. Additional work by Mr. X et al., which means that he also have other sources, other authors. We're not listing all of them because the list is long. Ali and Parry and so on dealt with, okay, comparison and critique. Now, when we go to comparison and critiques, we're just not summarizing, we're going into higher level. Evaluates the strengths and weaknesses of the work. How do the different studies relate to each other? What is new and what's different and what's controversial? What views need further testing? What evidence is lacking, inclusive, contradicting, or too limited? And what research designs or methods seem unsatisfactory? So we're looking at the critique side, we're looking at the missing part there. Sample language for comparison and critique. Here's some languages. In the ambitious but flawed study by Jason and Wang, or whatever names you are criticizing, you're giving the ambitious, you're describing, and then you say it's flawed, it's not correct. So this is higher level. We can also say that these general results reflecting the stochastic nature of the flow of goods are similar to those reported. So we're comparing here two different references. These are just some samples. Examples for comparison and critique. This is a dense one, where somebody have done a lot of work, and now we're combining everything together and compared. You can see lots of references in a small statement. This is usually reflects deep review, because we're looking at, it's not how much you write, it's how condensed and how focused you are. The critical response of the application of machine learning in material informatics often registers disappointment or surprise. We're criticizing, we're giving our views. Some critics have complained that the application is not supported with theory, reference 1, has limited trust, reference 2, and not conclusive, reference 3. Others, in contrast, have applauded the consistent results. So you can see that lots of things, lots of references being fused in one statement or two statements. The X model has also received its share of criticism. One of the most frequently cited shortcomings of this approach centers around the assumptions that. So we're going here to has received its share of criticism and shortcomings. We're criticizing here the reference or the theory. Okay, so here are some adjectives we can use. Unusual, small, simple, complex, restricted, exploratory, and then we have limited, flawed, important, competent, innovative, impressive, useful, and careful. This is just sample words that you can use to describe the word that you are criticizing. Of course, you need to be very careful when you say flawed or not correct or so, because finally your work might go into the reviewer, and the reviewer might be the same person whom you are criticizing. So you have to be double careful. You have to make sure that when you state something, it's perfectly correct, especially if it's a negative criticism. Now, analyzing, putting it all together, once you have summarized, synthesized, compared, criticized your chosen material, you may consider whether these studies, how are you going to organize them. You can look, for example, at would like to demonstrate the topic chronological development. You start with the old theories and you develop in a chronological order. You want to show different approaches to the problem. So approach number 1, approach number 2, approach number 3. Or, for example, you would like to show ongoing debate. If the subject is about a debate, 2 different theories, you can show that the pros and cons perspective of each in a debate format. Or center on a main study. So there might be one main idea and everything is centered around it. This is one also possibility. Or you might want to demonstrate that there is a paradigm shift. People were doing using cables and seismic surveys, and then at that date in 2003, for example, or 10, there was a paradigm shift, there was a change. So you're showing how things developed with time, and then you show where the paradigm shift is. Now, putting everything together, again, once you have analyzed everything and you decide your way of presentation, remember these questions. What do researchers know about this field? So I want to state something that built on their knowledge. What do researchers not know or they don't know? Why should we further study this topic? And then what we may study or contribute. What will my study contribute to the work? So you state what was there, you find the gap, and you demonstrate that this gap can be filled. Okay, here's an exercise. Again, back to reflection. Reflect on your work, balancing summary and analysis. What is missing in your field of study? Now go back to the application of this research skills to your specific research. Think for a while. You can pause the video. You can reflect on the comment section below. What is missing in your field of study? If you can state it, then you know how to link your literature review. Then the second question is, can you motivate your work based on the literature review? Can you write the literature review when then at the end you state that based on this literature review, there is a missing part, there is a gap. All right. Then now, once we're done with this stage, we go to the next stage, and this next stage, as you can see here, it's the 4th stage, and it's drafting. And drafting, it answered the questions, what am I going to write? We have collected the references, we decide the structure, and it's now time to write. So remember that there are two main types for literature review. We could be writing literature review just for the sake of, as part of a big paper or proposal. Or otherwise, it could be a literature review paper. It's a full stand-alone literature review paper. There are two possibilities. This is the most commonly the case, but at times you're just required to do a literature review, and that's it. So keep in your mind, sometimes we'll be talking about the first, at times we'll talk about the second. So examples of journals that accept they are fully accepting literature review: IEEE communication survey and tutorials. This is a high impact factor, more than 22 at the time of the presentation. Of course, it's not easy to write these. Usually it's by invitation. Examples of a paper. This is an example of a journal. Now we have an example of a paper. The paper itself is like Internet of Things, a survey on enabling technologies, protocols, and applications. And you can tell how many references they get for the literature review, because it's a generic work, and it will save many others from writing dedicated literature review. Okay, as a practice, check, please. You can stop the video. You can check the following reference, search for these, and build your knowledge or idea about an example of, if you have a different field other than communication or electrical engineering, find a survey and tutorial journal and find some highly cited example. You can write this down in the section, write your field, and give the examples specific to your field, and we can share them later on. Okay, now in every literature review there must be a thesis statement. You should know exactly what you are doing, and I'd like to share the following about the thesis statement. Okay, the thesis statement offers an argument about the literature. It may do any of the combinations of the following. Remember that there's a thesis statement to your work, but we can also have a statement to our literature review. Why are we doing this? It should offer an argument about the critical assessment of the literature in terms of topic and claim, provide an overview of the current scholarly conversations. It should point out gaps or weaknesses in the literature, relate the literature to the larger aim of the study. So this is like a statement. We mentioned this before, but we can say now that, okay, based on the mentioned statement, based on the literature review, the use of machine learning in finding new materials is a promising field, and then the literature shows that there is a very limited number of studies, and this suggests the use of machine learning for finding X, Y, and Z, and so on. So you can link all of these in a statement to show that this is the literature review thesis statement. Now, examples of this. When we talk about electromagnetic hypersensitivity, we can state the following. Electromagnetic hypersensitivity relates to the claim that sensitivity to electromagnetic field, that some people are hypersensitive to EM waves, to which harmful symptoms are attributed. So this is like introduction. Then we're saying specifically, in this article we review scientific basis and recognized medical diagnosis to evaluate the validity of this claim. So this is stating why are we doing this literature review. Another example is, in spite of these difficulties, we believe that that elementary arts teachers and classrooms teachers need some knowledge of stage theories of children's development. So the question is whether they need or they don't need. So we are putting our claim, and then we're supporting it or discussing it over the literature review. Here is an exercise. Again, you can pause the video and try to write your own thesis statement for your specific field. If you are doing research in power, control, communication, whatever, just try to write a thesis statement. Why would you specifically? Remember, this is an explicit statement saying that, okay, it has been stated that there is a correlation between the gender and being exposed to viruses, like with the coronavirus. This theory confirms this by doing by studying, reviewing the existing research, or is against this claim. So you state clearly what is being there. All right. Now, one usual way of presenting a literature review is the chronological characteristics. Usually you try to start with the old things first. List studies in terms of chronological development. Useful when the field displays clear development over a period of time. like in the technology field, in internet things and 4G, 3G, 5G, the mobile wireless communication systems. And you can show whether there is a linear progression or there is a paradigm shift. So unless there is a reason, it's good to have chronological list of references. Now, usually in new references, if you're doing a standalone literature review or it's a big part of your paper, they usually in the beginning, in the introduction, you indicate the scope of the literature review, provide some background of the topic, because you don't want to use terminologies and words that are not understood by the reader, and then you demonstrate the importance for research, make a claim. Remember that there is an importance for application and there is importance for research. Importance of the application may come in the beginning, but then you also need to show the importance of the research of the literature review. And then please make a claim, make a straight, clear claim in the beginning, and then offer an overview. This will help you focus. Offer an overview of map of the discussion. Just don't start with reference one. Okay, give the structure, the ideas. So for example, state that we're going to classify the references based on the technology used, and then we'll look at them based on the penetration in the market or whatever. So tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you are telling them, and then tell them what you told them. Of course, if it's a standalone literature review, there is a conclusion that summarizes the main findings of your review, provide closure, avoid sudden death. You should not have the last reference and then stop. You should always make the link. Based on this review, we find the following gap, and we suggest the following to fill it. Explain so what you mention all of this. Again, one of the common mistakes is to mention details from the references that are not linked to your work. You only cite others from the point that relates to you. So no need to give details, names, and strange words that does not belong to your work. Implication and future research or connection to the current work. So you have to link to your work. Citing sources. Alright, so if it's not your own idea and it's not common knowledge, reference it. These are the two conditions. It's not common knowledge, it's not your own idea. You have to reference it. Rephrase key ideas. Don't use the wording of the reference. If you want to use quotations, then you use them rarely and effectively. You cannot just copy everything between brackets. Use proper or quotation marks. Use proper in-text citations to document the source of ideas. Do not undercite. Whenever there is something that's not your work, make sure that you cite correctly. Keep accurate bibliographic records, because you will need to have the right reference list. Without having the information and keeping, you will get papers and you don't know exactly where you got them. There are softwares, of course, to support making this task easy. You can see the video of writing technical papers. Now the last stage is the revising. And the revising stage, of course, revising stage, it will tell you how can I fine-tune my draft. The title, is my title consistent? This is like a checklist. Is my title consistent with the content of my paper? Introduction, do I appropriately introduce my review? Does my review have a clear claim? Okay. Then we have, is the organization clear? Have I provided headings? Especially if it's a standalone review. Topic sentence, have I clearly indicated the major ideas of each paragraph? This is important. Each paragraph should be linked, related. So we start a new paragraph if we have different criteria for listing references. Transitions, does my writing flow, or is it a disconnected pieces? Do you have right connection, transitions? And then we have, do I provide sufficient closure, or is it a sudden death or sudden conclusion? And very important, spelling and grammar. Are there any major spelling or grammar mistakes? Always proofread your work. And finally, writing literature review and summary. These are the main ideas we'd like to conclude with. As you read, try to see the big picture. Your review should provide an overview of the state of the research. Include only those sources materials that help you shape your arguments. Okay, having lots of references is not always a good sign. Resist the temptation to include everything you have read. Balance summary and analysis as you write. So mention what they did and then analyze what they did. Keep in mind your purpose of writing. How will in review benefit the readers? Is this beneficial to them or not? How does the review contribute to your work? Is it related or not? So these are the important points I'd like you to take care of. Now, be very careful about citation. Be very careful about citation because it's a literature review and you're not trying to show that your work is what others did. You want to keep the credit for the others. Okay, for preparing this presentation, I also made use of the following reference. Okay, so with this, we're done with the literature review. I'd just like to remind you that we have covered two things: literature review, whether it's a part of a paper or whether it's a standalone paper. Okay, please visit our webpage. The material, the PDF file is provided, and if you have any comment or questions, please share in the comment section or in the description below the video. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time. We'll see you in coming videos.